Google's AI controversy, executive involvement in digital transformations, and how AI is affecting digital transformations. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here today in episode 163 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And I'm here with our co-host, Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Excited for today's episode. Before we get into the agenda here today, just a couple of quick logistical things. First of all, we release new episodes of this podcast every Wednesday, which you can find at the website transformationgroundcontrol.com. So be sure to check it out there. You can find the video and audio versions on whatever platform you prefer. Just go to transformationgroundcontrol.com. This show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, which is the company I work for, and the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. If you'd like to learn more about how to sponsor the show or become a sponsor of the show, you can go to, you can just contact Major Tom Productions at contact@majortom-productions.com. You can also go to majortom-productions.com to learn more about the content that you can sponsor there. So thanks for joining here today. We've got a great show. We've got a few great topics we're going to cover up front in the opening segment. We're going to cover some questions we've received from social media. So we'll start there, and then we'll get into some interesting articles and newsworthy topics here, including Google's AI controversy. We're going to talk about self-service at the Las Vegas airport and what sort of technologies and automation are being put in place at one of the United States' largest airports. And then we're going to get into our first guest, which is Bruce Siegel from a company called Karrikins Group. He's going to be on the show talking about executive roles and how executives should be involved in digital transformation. So stick around for that. We're going to cover leadership, executive alignment, executive buy-in support, how to manage up the organization, what leadership styles you need to demonstrate to be successful in digital transformation. We'll cover all that stuff with Bruce here later in the show. And then finally, after Bruce is on the show, we'll get into how AI is affecting ERP implementations and digital transformations. So be sure to stick around for that as well. I know AI is a hot topic right now that a lot of us are interested in. But before we get to all those topics and all of those guests, or our guest, I should say, what are some of the questions that you found for us here to discuss from our social media outlets, Darian?
Yeah, so the first question this week is from Naive Coder 2794 on YouTube. And this question is, organizations do not have trust on this LLMS with their confidential data. The solution to this problem is to create in-house LLMS and eventually an AI solution which takes a toll on financials as well as maintaining that down the line. That's why he believes that so many organizations rely on the traditional way when it comes to their confidential data. Eric, do you agree with this?
Well, I guess I'm not sure. So I guess he's saying that he's concerned about sharing confidential data on learning management systems. I'm going to assume that's what he means by LMS. And if I'm off, then he can always correct us and rephrase the question perhaps. But I think you kind of have to. First of all, you can roll out training and content on a learning management system as part of a change initiative. You can do that without necessarily revealing or sharing too much confidential data. Although, you have to keep in mind too, you're sharing that information presumably with internal employees. So if there's an internal employee that you're training on a new system, new processes, or whatever. They need to know, confidential information, confidential processes, and things of that nature. So I think maybe it's more a matter of first of all, making sure that you keep the information relevant to whoever you're training and whoever's accessing the LMS. But secondly, making sure you're not sharing too much confidential information that you don't want to have revealed to the entire organization. And then third, I'd say you also want to lock down the content on your internal LMS to make sure that external parties aren't able to access that. So if you do those three things, I think I would agree that you can, I guess I wouldn't necessarily agree, but I would say there's ways you can navigate the concern that you've got confidential data in your LMS.
Yeah, makes sense. And our second question is also from YouTube. This is from Dave Cruz 3054, and this is on your YouTube video talking about program versus project management. And he says, this is a great high-level view and explanation, although I'd say there are some intersection of DNA with software project management, which could be noted. My bias is that analytics are now a core function of UX within software, and the effort of creating new analytics should be treated as a software project as well. So what are your thoughts on that, Eric?
Yeah, so just to maybe set the context for the audience that may not have seen this video, there's a video I have on my YouTube channel where I talk about the difference between program versus project management. In fact, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can just search program versus project, and you'll probably find it, or program management versus project management. And in that video, I sort of whiteboard out what an organization chart typically or should look like for a digital transformation. And in that video, I sketch out like the overall program management at the top level, and then all the different work streams that fall within a program, including the technical work streams, the change management, the process improvement, the data migration, architecture and integration, et cetera. I think if I remember correctly, I might have had a bullet somewhere in there, like when I'm sketching it out, I might have in passing mentioned analytics, but to his point, I didn't call out analytics as a separate work stream. But I agree with him. There is a strong case to be made, depending on the focus of your transformation. There's a strong case to be made for wanting to have analytics as a separate work stream and a separate project within an overall program, especially if you're looking at a multiple system sort of transformation where you're going to be rolling out multiple systems, you're going to be integrating to other systems. That for sure would be worthy of some more focus on analytics. And even if you're rolling out a core ERP or human capital management system or CRM or whatever type of technology you might be deploying, even if it's just one system or one technology, there's still an opportunity to really focus in and hone in on what you want your analytics to be, what sort of data you're going to use to run the business going forward. And that ultimately will inform or should inform how you manage the overall project, especially in terms of the overall technical work streams. And also, it also will help inform how you manage the architecture and the integration of multiple systems if you're in a multi-system environment. So I tend to agree with that. I think analytics is becoming so important now, especially with AI and the focus on AI. We're not going to be able to get value out of artificial intelligence as an organization unless we have that sort of focus on data and on analytics. So I think it's a great comment, something that if I ever reshoot that video and do part 2 or take 2, I would probably, I might even add a second or another work stream in that discussion. But I would be curious to hear from the audience. If you do get a chance to check out that video, just go to my YouTube channel, search program versus project, and it's like a 20-minute whiteboard video. I'd be curious to hear other feedback from the audience as well. But I think it's a great point and great question from David, or I think that was his name, right? David?
Yeah, Dave. Yeah, great question, Dave. And speaking of AI, I'm really excited to dive into this AI controversy that Google is facing right now.
Yes, I am too. Yes, Google's got an AI controversy we're going to talk about. The Las Vegas airport in the United States is automating and offering, providing some self-service capabilities, which will be super interesting to talk about. Anytime the government is on the forefront of some new technological advances, it really catches my attention, because I always think, how did they do this, or what sort of led to this? It's exciting to chat about. And then after we get through these newsworthy topics, we're going to get into our first interview, or our main interview for today's episode. We're going to be talking about executive roles in digital transformation with Bruce Siegel, who's managing partner at a company called Karrikins Group, which specializes in helping drive executive alignment in organizations. And then later in the show, stick around too, because we'll talk more about AI. We'll talk about how AI is making ERP and digital transformation projects more successful. So we'll get to those topics and more here in just a few minutes. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. I am part of the company called Third Stage Consulting Group. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their software selection and implementation initiatives within digital transformation. And the show is sponsored by Major Tom Productions. So thank you for being here today. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. So be sure to check out that website to keep up with all of our weekly content that we publish every Wednesday. So Darian, you've got a couple of really interesting and controversial topics for us to discuss here today. What do you have in store for us?
Yeah, so the first one, we're going to talk about Google's AI controversy. So the recent Google Gemini AI chatbot, you could say, has been spotlighted and faced a lot of criticism regarding its rushed development and biases. Tech leaders argue that Gemini's flaws stem from Google's attempt to catch up with their competitors like Microsoft and OpenAI, leading to critical oversights in execution and a failure to adequately address biases in its AI models. Google's CEO even came out and has acknowledged that they need to fix the biases in Gemini, especially after the chatbot generated historically inaccurate images. This backlash raises significant concerns about the societal impact of AI and the need for tech companies to prioritize fairness and representation in their development process. This all being said, Eric, ethics in AI seeming to be a spotlight lately. Do you foresee any restrictions or boundaries being set for emerging AI technology in the future?
Yeah, I almost feel like it's inevitable that there will be some sort of regulatory parameters put around AI at some point in the future. I just don't see how the government could not do that, or how they could help themselves from regulating something that's going to have such a big impact on society and on business. But I think it also points out the deficiencies of AI, at least in the short term. Long term, maybe these deficiencies go away. But I think, AI is such a sexy topic. We're all excited about it. A lot of us have used ChatGPT and even Bing now. If you go to Bing, it integrates into Copilot and DALL-E and other AI tools that Microsoft has, and certainly Google. as you're discussing here, Darian, Google has their AI models. And I think it's a good reminder that AI is only as good as the data that it has access to. And, because humans are touching data, I'm struggling to see how AI will not be biased, because if we're humans and we're the ones creating the data, especially opinionated type stuff, how is an AI model not going to be biased in some way? I'll give you an example. I was messing around on ChatGPT several months ago, and I started asking ChatGPT, who are the world's leading independent digital transformation consulting firms? And of course, I was hoping to see Third Stage would be number one. And of course, who else would you mention besides Third Stage Consulting? And that was not what I found in AI. When I Googled it, it listed out like Deloitte, Accenture, and several consulting firms. Third Stage was on there. I mean, I think it was like fifth down the list or whatever. But the ones that listed first were 4 companies that I know are not independent. So in my mind, I'm thinking, how is ChatGPT giving me a faulty answer? Because Deloitte and Accenture are not independent and tech agnostic consulting firms. So why are they listed here? So that's just a small microcosm of what's probably a bigger pattern or trend within the AI world, is that for whatever reason, AI thinks that those firms are independent, even though they're not. And so I'm not sure why that is or how that is, but you can imagine, like, when you get into things like politics or religion or things like that, how is AI going to maintain a neutral stance when we all have strong opinions on that? Or, who's the greatest athlete of all time? If I were to enter that, I don't know what answer I'd get out of ChatGPT or whatever, but chances are pretty high I'm going to disagree with whatever it comes out, and chances are pretty high that a lot of people are going to agree and a lot of people are going to disagree. So I don't know. It's just stuff like that. I'm not sure how we navigate it, or if maybe we have to figure out specific use cases on where we do and don't use AI. But super interesting topic though, and I think it'll be fun to see how this all evolves over time.
I definitely agree. I think that it'll be really interesting to see what kind of regulations that they come out with regarding AI. But since this kind of mistake, you could say, that Google made with maybe rushing out their AI or having it have these biases, how do you think this initial setback can teach Google some lessons? What can they take away from this in order to positively maybe come out on top of their competitors by making mistakes so early on in the AI world?
Yeah, I think that's true, that, by making mistakes, they're going to improve the model. The good news with Google is they have such big scale and access to so much data that I have to think they've got an advantage over a lot of AI providers. If you look at the really big tech companies like Google, Apple, Microsoft with Bing, all these organizations or software solutions that are touching so many people. And then in the enterprise technology space, if you look at the really big ERP software providers like SAP and Oracle and Microsoft, they have so many different customers now that are in the cloud running their cloud solutions, and they have access to this data that, I do think that scale and size is going to be a real big differentiator in the AI world, for better or for worse. Whether you agree or not, whether you like it or not, might be a different story. But I think Google's going to have an advantage here. I would think they're going to be definitely top 5, if not top 3, or maybe even number 1 in terms of access to data and potential strength of the AI models and the data sets they have to work with. So I have to think that between making these mistakes and having access to such broad data sets, I have to think that it's going to only improve from here.
Yeah, definitely. I would agree. I think that making these mistakes early on, they can learn like the lessons they need to, and then obviously improve it from here, and hopefully not have incorrect data show up in the future.
Yeah, no one wants that.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm excited to talk about our next topic. Our next article is about TSA self-service in Las Vegas. So the first TSA self-serving screening system in the U.S. is launching at the Las Vegas airport, offering pre-check passengers an innovative way to expedite their security process. This 6-month trial aimed at reducing TSA workload and enhancing passenger experience could set a precedent for other airports if successful. If not primarily focused on saving time, the system seeks to offer more passenger-friendly experience, right? So you're getting through TSA faster. You don't have to work with somebody maybe directly at TSA, and you can get right to your gate, and hopefully cut that time down. So I think those are the initial objectives of this. Eric, what are your initial thoughts regarding this news, and do you believe that this will be the future of a TSA experience for passengers?
Well, I hope so, because I travel a lot and I don't like having to wait in long lines. But I think we will see that throughout the world, not just TSA. For those that aren't in the U.S., TSA is the Transportation Security Administration. I can't remember exactly what it stands for, but basically it's the group that screens you before you go to the airport. It's the security group that screens you, not before you go to the airport, but as you're going through security. That's TSA is what runs that in the United States. It's part of our Homeland Security division of our government. But I think it will. That's sort of where we're headed. I was just a couple of weeks ago. I was in Amsterdam. In fact, we filmed this podcast live from Amsterdam on that episode, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. And when I was leaving, I believe it was when I was leaving Amsterdam, or it might have been when I was entering Amsterdam. I don't remember. It was when I was entering Amsterdam. When I went through customs, it was all facial recognition, so it just did like a facial thing, and then it knew who I was, and it led me through. I might have my facts wrong. I don't remember which airport, because I had a bunch of connections and flights during that week, but I thought it was it's somewhere in Europe where I had that happen. But it was really fascinating. It was really fast. I didn't talk to anyone, see anything. I didn't even. I don't think I even had to get I did have to get my passport stamped, but that was the only human interaction I had. But they just stamped it. Once you got through, they didn't ask me anything or check anything. They just stamped my passport, and I went straight through. So I do think that's sort of where we're headed. It's really cool to see too. Like, it's fascinating that facial recognition, AI, all that stuff. How it's all tying together at the consumer level now too. So that'd be great if we could speed things up at the airport. That would make lives easier for consultants and our team of consultants here at Third Stage, and consultants throughout the world for sure, and anyone else who travels.
I totally agree with that. I just think one of my concerns that I might have, and questions that I have basically, is that I don't really know how AI can help with the safety side. Is it still you go through obviously all the screening and everything like that to get through all the safety precautions and everything that we use at the airports? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or what maybe it could look like in the future if it's no workers and just technology kind of running it.
Yeah, it's really interesting, because it is pretty manually intensive right now to scan people's baggage and to manually look for concerns or safety issues. Although the technology, if you ever watch the screens at some airports, I don't know if it's all of them, at some airports it'll have like it'll highlight like on the screen when the TSA or the security person's reviewing the stuff going through the X-ray. It looks like there's some sort of AI or something that sort of highlights things that the person should be looking at or looking closer at. So I think there's, it seems like they're pretty advanced technologically on helping augment what humans do. But I also wonder, like you're talking about AI a moment ago, we were talking about AI with Google. It makes you wonder, like, is there a better way to where like certain people don't get screened as much or as thoroughly? Like if the AI model knows that, for example, I travel every week for work, or not every week, but most weeks for work, and it knows that, whatever my demographic or my socioeconomic profile does not point to someone who's going to create a safety concern, could I be expedited through the line that way? I don't know. It gets back to your earlier question of biases and faults and flaws with AI models. I guess it would only work if the data was pretty, if the models and the data were pretty accurate. And I don't think there's going to be much of a tolerance for any sort of margin of error in that. So we might be way far away from that ever happening, but it could be something that might be interesting to see if technology could help expedite that.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe it's just a thing where you do your facial recognition, but you still got to go through the whole safety scans or whatever. I don't know. It would be interesting to kind of see how it develops, and to follow this TSA self-screening in Las Vegas to see everything that they kind of find from this trial period that they're in.
Yeah, and for all the security organizations that are part of governments throughout the world, if you don't mind just adding me to your easy expedited list, that'd be great, because it'll make at least I can get through the line faster that way whenever I'm traveling, wherever I go. But that's probably not going to happen. Well, good. Well, I'm excited to bring on our first guest to discuss the executive's role in digital transformation and how executives need to lead transformation, what some of the pitfalls are. And What are some of the qualifications or characteristics that executives need to demonstrate? We'll also talk about how to manage up the organization too. If you're not an executive, how do you create alignment? How do you create buy-in and support for an initiative? And it's going to be a fascinating conversation. We're going to have Bruce Siegel on, who's a managing partner at a company called Karrikins Group. He's going to be on chatting with me about that topic. And then later we're going to come back to this AI thing because we just can't seem to get enough AI in this world. We're going to talk about how AI is making ERP and digital transformation initiatives more successful. So be sure to stick around for that. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space. And she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. You can also see all of our 162 past episodes at transformationgroundcontrol.com as well. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is the company I work for. We're an independent and technology agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with software selection, digital strategy, implementation planning, implementation program management, change management, all that good stuff. Everything you need to make your project successful, that's what we do from a tech agnostic and an independent perspective here at Third Stage Consulting. And this show, this podcast, is produced by Major Tom Productions. So if you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, you can go to majortom-productions.com. You can also reach out to us. I've included contact information in the description below. If you'd like to learn more about sponsorship opportunities, I've included contact information for Major Tom. So I'm excited for our guest here today, Bruce Siegel, who's the managing partner of Karrikins Group. He's an expert in helping clients, and I shouldn't say he's an expert, but so is his team. He and his team are experts in helping clients with their executive alignment initiatives and just executive leadership types of stuff. And that's exactly what we're going to cover here today. We're going to talk about the role of executives in digital transformations. We're going to talk about some of the pitfalls of leading change, what some of the challenges are, some of the traits and characteristics you need to demonstrate to be effective as a leader in digital transformation. And we'll also talk about how to manage up. How do you manage up the organization? If you're not an executive, how do you ensure that you have executive leadership and buy-in and support, and how do you influence the organization? So it's a lot of stuff we're going to cover in this interview, so we're going to dive right into it. So with all that being said, Bruce, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, excited to have you on this show for the first time. We've known each other a long time, but this is the first time we're having this sort of more formal podcast interview. So thanks for being here. Before we jump into the questions surrounding executive alignment, executive support, all that good stuff, maybe tell us a little bit about you and about Karrikins Group.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Well, when you first approached me about the topic, Eric, it really reminded me probably about 20 years ago when we first met. You were running a massive digital transformation for Samsonite. I was the account exec for the same consulting company that we worked for. And our paths took very different turns. Yours, where it ended up now, is with Third Stage, helping organizations really with the important work and the massive amount of work that surrounds digital transformations. And mine, which now led me to Karrikins Group. And at Karrikins Group, we help leaders really figure out how they need to lead, whether it's for a digital transformation or any transformation where they're trying to drive growth. I've been leading Karrikins Group for about 9 years now. Prior to that, I had about 30 plus years leading various consulting practices, whether internationally or here in the US. Karrikins Group is this interesting intersection. We're a combination of a behavior change firm, a consulting firm, and a leadership firm. And all of that comes together with helping leaders really understand how do they lead, how do they drive growth and transformation through the power of alignment.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, it is very interesting how it is such a small world here in the world of transformation. I mean, you and I sort of started off in a similar spot, or we were at a similar spot 20 years ago. We sort of ran in parallel for a while, and here we are crossing paths again. So I suppose once you're in this industry, it's hard to stray far from it. But just real quick before I get to my first questions here for you, Bruce, just to turn to the audience for a second. I mentioned that Rahesh is joining from St. Martin, Gary from the UK, Carol from Boulder, Kate from Denver, Varun from India, Alcinda from South Africa, Julie from Denver. I think you know Julie, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
I think you know her pretty well. She on your team. So people from all over the world here today, thank you for joining. If you haven't dropped in the chat, love to hear where you're joining from here today. So maybe just to help us set the context and sort of the backdrop here for the conversation, and be curious to hear what the audience thinks in terms of questions and comments here too. But if we just sort of back up and look at the concept of executive involvement in any sort of transformation initiative, I think we all kind of know that it's important, but maybe you could just help explain or unpack a little bit why it's so important to be successful, or why is it so important to have that executive involvement and that positive engagement to make a transformation successful. Why is that?
Yeah, it's almost crucial, and without executive involvement and really executive alignment, it's very difficult for any transformation to reach the outcomes that it really wants. A lot of times with major transformations, these are very ambitious goals that executives are setting for the organization and asking a lot of individuals to participate in and successfully execute on. And without the executive involvement, it's difficult to overcome all of the barriers. What we like to say is executives need to make a worthy ask of their employees and any of the stakeholders that are involved in that. And for it to be a worthy ask, they really need to provide clarity around what is it that we're trying to achieve. And then through that, how do they create connection and commitment to achieving those goals, and for themselves to show the courage of what it's going to mean, what are the changes that they're going to need to make this transformation successful. Without executive involvement throughout the entire transformation, and quite honestly, we've seen a lot of programs where executives start out, where there's a lot of initial push, but that push dies off as they're off, as we say, doing more important things, when the reality is they need to be much more involved from a continuous basis, and we would call that a successful simmer.
Right. So when you think about executives that are going through transformations, and when they're first starting off, and when they're kind of getting their heads around how we're going to lead this change. And by the way, I'm going to back up a second. I ask you this question because you and I have talked about how my perception of your role and what Karrikins does, it's almost like you're an executive whisperer in some ways. You're coaching executives. You're sort of working one-on-one with them to help them understand what they need to do to be successful and do some of the things you just mentioned. But when you are approaching these executives and they're just getting started on a transformation and they're trying to get their arms around how to lead, how would you describe the state of mind typically of executives? Like, just especially if we're not executives, if I'm on a project team or I'm a mid-level manager and I'm trying to understand what my executives are going through, what they're thinking, how would you describe that or unpack that for us?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's difficult to come up with one state of mind. It depends on the executive. It depends on how long they've been in the role. It depends on, quite honestly, how secure they are in their capabilities. We see different mindsets. On the one side of the mindset is they've seen a lot of their predecessors potentially fail at various transformations, and some of the organizations that we consult with, these are board level transformations where the board has to approve these major multi-year investments, whether they're big acquisitions, whether they're big digital transformations, whether internally or externally. And a lot of them have seen their predecessors try to push and drive similar large efforts, and their tenure may have been short. And so they don't want to be their predecessor or their predecessor's predecessor. And so that's in the back of their mind. I mean, I think we need to remember how risky some of these endeavors are. On the flip side, there's a lot of executives who are very growth mindset and really looking at how do they create the space for the employees to thrive and their stakeholders and customers to thrive. And this is a very natural evolution of where they want to take their company. So mindset's very, very different.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And in the hot seat mentality or the reality that so many executives are in the hot seat because their predecessors failed. I think that's a really good point worth noting. A lot of executives are brought into the organization because either someone failed before them or strategically the company is floundering a bit, and they're brought in to make a change and to do something bold that previous people couldn't. So do you sense that executives in that role, like, I know it's probably hard to generalize across all the executives you work with, but in general, is there a certain amount of confidence that goes with that? Is there a certain amount of fear? Is it like, how would you describe the psyche of an executive in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, again, varies dramatically. I think some depends on their tenure at the executive level. We have seen a lot of executives, even if they have a growth mindset, they're also afraid potentially to be looked at as a cheerleader, where they're too optimistic, potentially on the bordering of delusional. And so what we look to is working with executives is how do they be intentionally optimistic? Intentionally optimistic is this really beautiful blend of being realistic and knowing what's possible in the future. Being realistic, this is going to be really hard. This is going to take a long time. And we have the right resources, we've got the right attention, we've got the right intellect to really overcome those challenges and probably do what might not be possible for a lot of other organizations.
Yeah, I love that term, intentionally optimistic. That's a great term. I might steal that or license it from you if you don't mind.
Feel free, as long as you credit back.
Right, exactly. We're here with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group talking about the role of executives in digital transformations. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. I recently published my first book. It's called The Final Countdown, Strategies to Reach the Third Stage of Digital Transformation. And I wrote this book because I really wanted to find a concise way to share some of my knowledge around digital strategy and how to get started on a digital transformation journey. So in this book, I cover 3 different sections. I cover the people, process, and technology aspects of transformation, with the idea that it's meant to be a starting point, a launching pad for organizations and team members that are going through digital transformations. So I encourage you to buy this book. You can get it electronically, you can get it paperback, or you can get it in hard copy, as I'm holding here in front of you. You can get it by going to thefinalcountdown.com. You can also search for it on Amazon if you shop at Amazon. Otherwise, just go to thefinalcountdown.com. Love to hear your feedback on this book as well. So I hope you check it out and hope you enjoy.
I'm excited to share our newly released 2024 Digital Enterprise Operations Report. This free download is available on the Third Stage website at thirdstage-consulting.com. This report is truly packed full of technology-independent and agnostic insights for your project to ensure that you're strategically optimized for success. Download your copy today with the QR code in front of me or visit our website for more details.
These things take time. Mom and dad, they have a good life. But what am I gonna do with mine?
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, and the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. I'm here in the midst of an interview with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group, talking about the role of executives and leaders in digital transformation. Let's jump back into the conversation. And I'd love to hear from the audience too, what you think. What is the state of mind of a lot of the executives you're working with, whatever executive team or executive sponsor you're working with? What sort of the state of mind or behavior are you seeing from your executives? I'd love to hear from the audience on that. And speaking of the audience, this is a great question from Gary that I want to ask you here, Bruce. Gary on YouTube asks, why are executives so resistant to change around digital transformations? Is it the perception of losing control through new, more transparent processes, or is this just a UK thing? And this is an interesting question because we're talking about resistance to change, which typically we think resistance to change is going to come from further down the organization. But here he's asking executives themselves, why are they resistant to change? Is this something you see often, or how would you respond to Gary here?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any one group of individuals is resistant to change or accepting of change. I think it's not categorized by the role they have as an executive. We also have to be conscious of executives. They're trying to move a lot of different efforts along, and digital transformation may be one of many things that they're trying to do. So, a lot of the executives we work with, they're at the C-suite. Some have very large publicly traded organizations, and you have to think about the various pulls on their time and attention and focus. And so digital transformation, while is very important to the organization, it might be one of many very important things that they're working on. So I wouldn't categorize as executives as being generally just resistant to change. They may not understand the amount of focus and attention that's required to it. To Gary's question, there's also some executives who it's difficult for them to start changing their behaviors and how they do their job. So in the case of digital transformation, if you're talking about the CFO, in many cases, the CFO needs to dramatically change how they operate. Whether they're used to spreadsheets or their own source of record for the data, and now they're asking the organization to go enterprise-wide with an ERP system. They now need to manage differently. They now need to manage their folks and lead their folks differently so that everyone's using the capabilities of the solution, not just the people in the front line. The executives now need to know how are they going to lead differently. And that's a lot of the work we do is what are the behavioral commitments that executive need to make as a collective as well as an individual. And really, how do they start with self? How do they show that this is an important effort by signaling that they're also going to change the way they operate internally and externally?
One thing I've found in my experience or career, and I'm curious to see what you think here, Bruce, and if you have seen this before or how you've dealt with this, but a lot of times you get executives that have this right mindset, and let's just say they have the intentional optimism that you described. Let's just say we start off on the right foot, we've got the right men's mindset, we have the right intentions as an executive team, but then sometimes there's like a misunderstanding of what's to come. Like they don't necessarily understand how a transformation is going to affect the organization and how the organization is going to respond and what their role should continue to be, other than providing that right mindset and that right leadership. There's more to it, to provide that executive sponsorship and buy-in and support. What are some of the biggest misunderstandings do you think that executives have, or what are the blind spots they have typically when they go into transformations like this?
I think, from my experience, a lot depends on how the transformation is set up. I think a lot of executives don't dedicate the dedicated resources to the transformation. And in some ways, these big transformations become what we would call a side hustle to their day-to-day job. So I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding of how do you keep the business moving while also doing this transformation. And it's very difficult for the same group of resources to do both. And so sometimes there's a misunderstanding around that. I wouldn't say it's all the time, but there's definitely a misunderstanding sometimes in that space. I think also there's a very big difference between change enablement and change management. I think a lot of executives believe that if they put a change program in place and they are helping individuals react to the change as opposed to changing the culture and saying, okay, how do we become changeable? How do we, in a continuous way, look at probably transformation is going to happen all the time, whether it's big T or little t transformation. And how do we create a culture that really embraces this transformation and creates and leans into this transformation? So it's a continuous effort.
Right. That's a great point. And it's that continuous mindset and that understanding of what, the proactive versus the reactive aspect that you're talking about, proactively getting the organization ready for change and the change enablement. I think that's super interesting because I think you're right. We do, as transformation practitioners and as leaders, oftentimes we think of this as a way that we're going to respond to the resistance. We'll respond to the organization when there's negativity or when there's concern or pushback or whatever. But what you're saying is get ahead of that and create a culture that is open to change and is able to adapt a little bit better. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're right. Change practitioners are probably at the center of that challenge. Yeah. We've created a whole practice of helping individuals deal with change as opposed to helping individuals embrace change and be part of that change and create the change. And so this what that just brought to mind is this whole concept of WIFM. So what's in it for me? As change practitioners, we spend a lot of time defining how this is going to improve the employee's way of being within their current job. I think what we don't do, and a lot of executives can lean into this, is how do we create clarity around what does this mean to our customers? What does this mean to our company? What does this mean to our industry? And how do we broaden that, what we would call worthy ask? How do we make this transformation be something that's just a dramatic positive effect on all of the constituents that deal with our organization?
Here's a follow-up comment from Gary, just sort of in response to what you just said, Bruce. But Gary on YouTube says, I would say 80% of execs that I have worked with at big companies in the UK, public and private sector, are very resistant. I tend to find that people lower down are more open. It's a super interesting comment. Do you find that to be the case where you have some clients where the organization does have that mindset of change and they're ready for change, and then the executives are resistant? Have you seen that in your career?
Absolutely. I mean, whether it's 20% or 80%, I couldn't say, but yeah, there's definitely executives who are resistant to change. One of the things that we've seen is, again, it depends on the tenure. So as executives get further in their tenure, so as they're looking 5, 7, 8 years out and they've been in that role, they may be looking about how do they transition out of this role? How do they retire? What's their legacy? And then as they get to the end of their career, they might be a little bit more resistant to change. There's a great article from McKinsey that I can post if you like, Eric,
Sure.
that really talks about how do CEOs and more broader, how do executives keep their learning agenda going? And they specifically talk about executives post 5 years, especially if they've been highly successful. They look at, there's a gravity. One of the terms we have is there's a gravity to that success. And they may be a little bit more reluctant to mess with that success by continuing the transformation and continuing the change. Right. And so part of that learning agenda is CEOs and executives, how do they get outside their organization? How do they shadow other executives from other industries to see how other businesses are growing and transforming? And that's just one example from the article, but it's a great article from McKinsey.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. And if anyone I don't know if you can post it or if anyone from your team can post it in the chat, that'd be a great supplemental resource for the audience here.
Yeah. And Eric, it also brought another thing to mind. There's this concept of finite and infinite. There was a book back in the mid 80s by a guy named James Carse, not a very well known author or author or publication. And I believe the book was called Infinite and Finite Games. And Simon Sinek popularized this idea of infinite games with his book, that came out in the mid to late 2000s, 2019, I think. And it talks about this mindset. Do you have a finite mindset or an infinite mindset? And if you think about businesses, and especially publicly traded companies, they are built on a construct of things in quarters and annual timeframes, because they've got to report to their shareholders. Executives, and if you can help executives think more of an infinite mindset, and that looks at the infinite game is the game is never over. And the purpose of the game, and they just call it a game, but the purpose of business is, how do you bring more stakeholders into the success of this organization? And that may take 1, 2, 3, 10 years, 100 years. And so helping individuals, whether at the executive level or at any level in the organization, think more in the infinite mindset is a lot of times very helpful. And even just bringing up that concept, because you have to do both. You have to operate in some instances in a finite setting, but if you change your mindset to be more infinite, it helps expand the options and actually makes change a lot less risky.
That's super interesting. I had not heard that concept before, but it makes sense as you're describing it, but it's one of those subtle but really important shifts in thinking, I imagine. We're here with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group talking about the role of executives in digital transformations. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, and the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. I'm here in the midst of an interview with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group talking about the role of executives and leaders in digital transformation. Let's jump back into the conversation. Here's an interesting comment. I'm going to see if I can fit it. It will not fit on the screen, but I'll read it anyway. This is from Alcinda on LinkedIn. It's a great comment. She says, I get the sense that because they are in leadership positions that they are meant to direct the posture of the organization, this manifests in some sort of fear that they need to have the answers to all the questions, but these transformations need to go through an iterative process and come with uncertainties, so it would be an unfair expectation of them. So maybe just to frame that into a question, if you're an executive, how do you deal with that, or how do you address the fact that there's a lot of stuff you don't know as a leader and people are looking to you as a leader to have that clarity? But these projects, as Alcinda rightly mentions, they come with uncertainty. There's a lot of unknowns we're still trying to define. How do you deal with that as an executive?
Yeah, I love that question. And what I would say is one of the most important roles of the executive and the executive team is to what we would call create the space for quality conversations. The executives writ large don't need to have all the answers. They've hired really smart people, and usually there's a lot of people working on these transformations. And if the executives literally create the space for quality conversations, which means how do you create an environment where people feel comfortable to be honest, to provide their perspective on how things are going, probably the worst thing for any transformation is when everything's green, because everything is never green. And if everything is, well, typically everything's not green. There's no absolute. Right. But if everything's green, you have to ask the question, is there fear in the organization or fear within groups of the organization that if it's not green, will there be ramifications to it? And so if the executives have created the space for quality conversations, creating the environment where there's no repercussions for talking about where things might not be going well, that would probably be one of the most important things that we would talk to executives about. What can they do to make sure that this transformation, quite honestly, their organization is highly successful?
Right. Well, and there's also a lot of power and merit in an executive saying, I don't know, we don't yet have an answer to whatever it is, whatever the unknown is. But setting that expectation with the organization and maybe setting that back to that intentional optimism, an executive can say that, hey, this is going to transform our business and here's all the ways that we're going to make our business better. However, there are going to be challenges along the way. You sort of have to set the expectation that this isn't going to be all unicorns and rainbows. This isn't going to be an easy ride. It is going to be a lot of work, but I have faith in you as a team. We're going to figure this out together. That sort of messaging, I think, can be very powerful rather than trying to pretend like you have all the answers. And when you start to pretend like you have all the answers and then you don't, I think that's where you start to get into trouble.
Yeah, I agree. First off, Eric, excellent job in talking about what intentional optimism is. It almost sounds like you read some of the material. So well done.
Exactly. See how fast I steal your idea? It only takes me seconds to steal your ideas, Bruce.
Well done. This other concept, other mindset just came to mind for me. When the question talked about fear, we also have to remember that within the executive ranks, a lot of times there's a group dynamic amongst their own peers that one executive may feel like they've got a concern or a fear that if they don't have the answer for their peers, that they're going to be looked upon as not being competent. So this fear, I think, potentially goes throughout organizations. And one of the group dynamics, which we would say is the misaligned group dynamic based on our behavior change model, one of those misaligned group dynamics of fear is one of the things that we definitely address. And how do you address that? By creating much more confidence, creating this environment for quality conversations, having just a realistic perspective that there needs to be progress, not perfection. And in any one conversation, I may or may not have all the answers.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense. Here's an interesting question from Sid on LinkedIn. Sid says, from your perspective, how do you delineate the vision of many executives who may have short or near-term goals, as you just mentioned, Bruce, to the goals of a digital transformation, which is often a continual process? So it sort of gets back to Alcinda's point, too. There's a lot of stuff we don't know yet about this transformation. We don't know how it's going to unfold. We don't know yet how it's going to impact the organization necessarily. So how do you connect the dots here between the vision or the goals, short-term or long-term, to the digital transformation itself?
Yeah, I mean, we would engage in a conversation with those executives around, okay, what's the destination that you're looking to achieve for this organization? And what we would talk about is, what's your strategic destination? So 3 to 5 years out, where do you want to go with this organization, not just with this transformation? And then how do you lead through that destination? Don't lead just to that destination, because even if you're 3 to 5 years out, you could start bringing in some finite mindset and finite thinking, but lead through that. But know that that's one destination, that's one stop along this potentially 10, 20, 100-year path that we're trying to get to. So it's linking back to what are the ambitious goals that this executive team and this organization is trying to achieve.
Right. Yeah. And here's kind of a funny comment from Alcinda as a follow-up on LinkedIn. She says, my supervisor calls this temporary incompetence that uncertainty comes with. So it's an interesting choice of words. I don't know if I'd call it incompetence if I were a leader, but I see the point there. It does kind of make sense. There's stuff we don't know for sure as we go through a transformation.
Well, yeah, and that's absolutely true. And I think part of the work that you guys do is, how do you look at continuing to look out? And I think some of the combinations between what you do and what we do is, we look at, if you're going to develop a strategy, if you're going to develop a plan, how do you build in very regular course corrections and make that not only an okay part, but a necessary part of the transformation? I think the days are gone where you spend 18 months developing a plan, developing a strategy, and then you spend the next 5 years implementing that. What we see is now things are much more agile. Strategies, even for large enterprise organizations, are developed in weeks, maybe a few months. And the most advanced organizations and executives are looking at it at a minimum on a quarterly basis. How are we creating regular course corrections? And it's not a bad thing. And that's get rid of the stigma that if we're tacking and changing course, that's not a bad thing. That's actually expected.
Right. Yeah. What about, we've talked about the way organizations and leaders and executives should be on a transformation and how they should lead. Why do so many organizations struggle with a lack of executive involvement or buy-in? Because that does seem to be a common root cause for failure, is that the executives aren't on board or they're not supporting the project the way they should. Even if they start off with the right mindset that you're talking about, oftentimes it doesn't translate into the execution that needs to happen from the executive team. So why is that?
Well, I think part of it is how much time is spent on what the transformation is. Not only what it is, but also how are we going to accomplish it? So the more lower level initiatives. And then some time is spent on why is this important? And we just see very little time, typically in relative terms, is spent, how do we need to lead to make this transformation successful? So it's a bit of a mindset shift. If the executives, and specifically the most senior executives, really start articulating the why, and what we talked about earlier, not only the why internally, but probably more importantly, the why externally. How is this going to transform the industry? How is this going to transform our experience for our customers? Really making that word the ask. And at the same time, looking at how do we need to lead? And very specifically, how do we need to lead collectively in an aligned way? Without doing that very dedicated work, it just doesn't happen. There are other people that are going to go off on the why and the what, but the executives really need to focus on, at every level within the organization, these leadership teams really need to focus on collectively, how are we going to model the way? How are we going to start with self? And how are we going to hold each other accountable to the behaviors that we know we need to demonstrate that's actually going to make the transformation successful?
Yeah. Very, very well said. What about executive alignment? Maybe you could help us understand this concept. I know your colleague Julie was on this podcast recently, and she talked a lot about executive alignment. For those that may have missed that discussion, though, what is executive alignment and why is it so important to transformation?
We look at executive alignment and any alignment under a couple competencies. We look at clarity, connection, commitment, and courage. And we call those the 4 C's. Every firm, every consulting firm has to have various models, and that's one of our models.
You probably have a PowerPoint slide too, right?
Actually, we use very little PowerPoint slides.
Oh, okay.
So it's probably, it's more in a methodology and a model that people can visualize, but we use very little in the PowerPoint space. PowerPoint is not our programming language of choice anymore.
Right.
But this concept of clarity is really interesting, and alignment starts with clarity. And most individuals, and executives are no different, most individuals believe once they're clear and they state that to others, that clarity has been created. But the reality is, unless you are able to get individuals into a dialogue, and that dialogue helps create shared meaning, that there is no clarity. Clarity does not exist. Because clarity of one does not mean that it's clear on what we're going to do, why we're doing it, and how we're going to do it. And so that shared meaning might be is a very important aspect of creating alignment. So we start with clarity, and within clarity, there's also this concept of how do you create the invisible visible? There are a lot of things that are going on internally within folks that create this idea of misaligned group dynamics, misaligned mindsets, and how do you bring those to the forefront? And then how do you then address those things that might not be aligned to where you want to go? So 2 aspects of clarity is this idea of shared meaning, and making the invisible visible.
Right.
The next element of alignment we would look at is connection. So how do you create the connection for all of the individuals that are going to go on this transformation journey to be able to connect the dots? Connect the dots from a function perspective. How is this transformation going to change various things, and how do they interrelate? And as important, how do you connect the dots between people and that intersection of people? Because if it's truly transformative, it's going to affect many aspects of the organization. And so without that interconnectivity across functions, it'll be very difficult to be successful. A next element of alignment we look at is commitment. And how do you show commitment? How do you hold yourself and others accountable to this goal that you're setting and the behaviors that it's going to take to achieve those? And last is courage. One element of courage is, first of all, how do you start with self? A little bit overused term is how do you be more vulnerable? But really, how do you be more transparent about what's happening? Why is it happening? What's my part in this? And then lastly, what I mentioned earlier, this idea of creating the space for quality conversations. Alignment requires individuals and executive teams to solve the avoided. So what are the things that are either not being discussed or not fully explored, whether it's based on what we talked earlier, the fear of retribution, or the fear of bringing up that something's yellow or red, or it's just my own personal concern that I'm an introvert and I might not want to talk in front of a group. Whatever it might be, whatever those reasons that things are being avoided, part of the executive team's responsibility and the ability to create alignment is cataloging those things that are being avoided and then systematically addressing them.
That's super interesting. So summarize again for those of us taking notes. What are the 4 C's again? Just could you run through those real quick again?
Sure. Clarity, commitment, connection, and courage.
Okay. So coming back to the clarity one then, do you run into a situation often or ever where you go into an executive boardroom or you meet with an executive team and the clarity isn't there, not because they don't want to create the clarity, but because maybe they're not on the same page with what the transformation means to the organization and how they want to?
Yes.
Okay. So help us understand that.
Yeah. So a lot of times there's either a lack of understanding or probably more specifically a different set of understanding around what the transformation is. There's also a situation where people understand what the transformation is, but they believe the transformation is for others, not for themselves. And so within our process of creating alignment, we literally facilitate co-creation sessions where we get executives into dialogue around what is this transformation? What does it mean to the broader organization? What does it mean externally? And then bringing it back home. What does it mean to this executive team? And what does it mean individually to each of the executives? And quite honestly, if each of the executives isn't going to have to change, whether it's how they lead, whether it's how they're directing resources, where it's how they're putting their own time and energy, it is probably not transformative or transformative enough. And so we have this concept of agreement versus alignment. And most individuals, most leaders confuse agreement for alignment. So agreement is just like you just did, Eric, you shook your head when I said something.
Right.
I actually don't know if you're aligned with what I'm saying. All I know is that you agree with what I'm saying. And it might be tacit. It might be tacit agreement. And unless you really start diving into what are the finer points, the details around the transformation, and how is it going to affect me personally as an executive? How is it going to affect my function? How is it going to affect the organization? And understanding what am I going to do differently, and really aligning to showing up and being different, behaving different, putting my time, effort, and energy in different spaces. There probably is no alignment. There's probably agreement. And agreement could be very risky and detrimental to an organization if you don't do the hard work of alignment.
We're here with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group talking about the role of executives in digital transformations. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
If you're going through an S/4HANA implementation, you're looking for best practices and tips on how to make your project more successful, I encourage you to check out 2 resources that I made available to our listeners here on this podcast. First is our guide to a successful S/4HANA implementation. It's a paper that I wrote based on all of our clients that have implemented S/4HANA, some of the lessons we've learned, some of the best practices that we typically advise our clients to follow when going through their S/4HANA implementation. So be sure to check that out. You can find that in the links below in this podcast. You can also scan the QR code right in front of you. The second thing you might want to check out is an online course that I've created. It's a course that's called the Deep Dive into SAP S/4HANA Implementations. And in that 2.5-hour course, I get into all the basics of what SAP S/4HANA is, what it takes to make the project more successful, how to manage change, how to handle the project planning, how to manage your system integrator, as well as some case studies from some of our clients and some of the lessons learned from some of our clients. So check out that training as well. So there's 2 things you can check out here, both in the links below. One is the guide to S/4HANA implementations. The other is my S/4HANA training course. So be sure to check it out. And our goal here is to help you be more successful in your transformation. So I hope you found this information useful, and we'll continue on with the show. Hello, and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is sponsored by Third Stage Consulting Group, and the show is produced by Major Tom Productions. I'm here in the midst of an interview with Bruce Siegel from Karrikins Group, talking about the role of executives and leaders in digital transformation. Let's jump back into the conversation. When you were talking about the nodding of the head, it reminded me of the case study. I think I studied in sociology. I think maybe it was a business class, but the case study where there was a plane crash, I think it was in South Korea, and it was a situation where the pilot, the co-pilot had a concern about something that was going wrong with the flight, and the pilot basically overrode the co-pilot because of the hierarchy and the cultural differences, the cultural hierarchy in businesses in parts of Asia in this case study. And it was talking about how the communication and the agreement and the alignment didn't happen because of cultural nuances. Yes. Do you ever see that in different parts of the world? I can imagine where someone nods their head and you think, okay, they're agreeing and aligned. But to your point, it might be, the points you just made might be even more true in certain cultures throughout the world, I would imagine. Is that something you see as well? Absolutely.
I see it. Yeah, we see it across the board. We see it in our domestic, in the US. We see it in international communities. It will show up differently. So just as an example, many years ago, I was living in Europe, running a European e-commerce practice. And I had probably 30 folks from different countries. No 3 individuals were from the same country. So mix and match of a lot of native cultures around the world. And if you, some of those individuals were from much more what we would call tribal cultures. And in those cultures, it's very difficult to speak against the chief. And in this situation, I was the chief. I was running the practice. It was an e-business practice. I was running that practice. And I had to be very deliberate about how do I elicit varying opinions from myself. And executives all over the world need to be very explicit about how do they do that. How do they lean into creating a space for quality conversations like we talked before. And part of what they have to do is they have to be explicit about, I might be showing up in a conversation and I might be providing my opinion. I'm not creating a vote. I'm not giving my vote for something, or I'm not deciding something. And if an executive or any individual is not being explicit about, this is my opinion, I would love to hear your opinion, and let's figure this out together, they're not going to be able to, especially in some of these other cultures, and some Asian cultures, as you've just articulated, they're not going to be able to elicit the amount of dialogue to create shared meaning, to create alignment. So they have to work extra hard to really articulate and slow down, and say, where are they coming from? What they're coming from is, this is my opinion. I really value your opinion. We're going to come to this decision together. Or in other instances, this is what I believe I'm going to make my decision on. I'd love to get your input, and I'm still going to make my decision. So they just have to be explicit when they're creating that alignment. It also made me think of, there are skills and capabilities we've all learned, especially folks who've been in the job force for a long time, who've learned through industrial management techniques. Many of those leaders have learned to drive change through command and control. And what we know now is that leadership style that has a time and place, but more often now leaders need to lead through influence. And the skills of alignment are really the skills of leading through influence as well.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think a lot of times we think that, you have to be command and control, or you have to not be command and control and be more influential. And reality is sometimes you need a mix of both, and it depends on the situation you're in, and how urgent is this transformation. If you're in a transformation that's responding to survival sort of need, then you might have a more command and control sort of approach. But if you're like most organizations, where you're just trying to get ahead, you're trying to keep up with the competition, you're trying to evolve as an organization, and maybe a little bit more organically go through the change, then you're right that you want to take less command and control, more influence, and maybe more of a bottoms up sort of approach.
Yeah. Well, your tendency may be to go command and control when things are struggling. And actually that might be the time that you have to lean more into, how do you lead through influence?
Yeah, that's interesting. Even though it's counterintuitive, because as a leader, I think you think, no, we don't have time for influence. We've got to go now. We've got to make decisions fast and all that sort of thing. So how do you, so maybe help us understand that. How does influence help a situation like that? Let's just say it's you've got a really tough project. The transformation's kind of going off track. People, the morale's low. You're sort of in a mess. How does influence help versus command and control to get that back on track?
Yeah. So if we go back to the 4 C's and we think about clarity, another element of creating clarity is this idea of, how do you tell powerful stories? And so you can actually affect more change and inspire more people by telling powerful stories, as opposed to dictating what an individual should do. So I've, on this podcast, been trying to tell some stories about what has my experience been. That may come across better in a learning environment than me stating what a given skill might be. And so this idea of telling powerful stories, and it's a very important skill for executives and individuals who want to lead. How do you take the concept of data that's out there that you're experiencing, narratives that are being created, and how do you bring them together to create a very powerful story of the reason for change? And part of this idea of a worthy ask, and how do you put the concept of why should we be doing this, is how do you create that worthy ask? How do you inspire folks through storytelling around, what will this do for our customers? What has been the challenge that our current customers have now, and maybe what's been holding us back? And what might be a much more positive future for this organization if we deliver on this transformation? So the idea of telling powerful stories, especially when things are maybe not going well, and really understanding what stories need to be archived, because we all have stories inside ourselves that may or may not be true anymore. And if they're not true to the situation and not going to be helpful going forward, how do you archive those stories? And how do you start putting out into the workforce, into the world, stories that are going to take you where you want to go?
Yeah. I'd love to hear from the audience too. If you're willing to say it out loud and in a public forum, you just sort of, how would you describe the leadership traits of the executives or the leadership team you're working with right now? Does it fit what Bruce is talking about here, or is there something different you're seeing? I'd love to sort of hear how would you summarize or describe the executive leadership style that you're seeing in your organization? We were talking about alignment a moment ago, Bruce. And speaking of alignment, here's a really interesting and relevant comment from Gary on YouTube. And he actually said this a few minutes ago, or much earlier in the conversation, even before we got to this thread. But I thought I'd come back to it because it's very relevant to what you were talking about. But he says, yes, first of all, organizations need to create a culture that gives people a safe place to criticize without the fear of being singled out for being a troublemaker. So back to your point about culture and alignment versus would you say it?
Agreement versus alignment.
Agreement versus alignment. How do you create that? How do you create that safe space? Especially if you're an organization that it has been historically command and control, or maybe people weren't listened to much in the past. How do you create that safe place? How do you transform to being a more collaborative culture where people can state their mind and give their opinion and be part of the solution?
Yeah, well, one of the steps up front is you need to make the invisible visible. Most people will feel that fear. Most people know it exists, but people have not put words to it. So we talk a lot about how do you notice and name things? How do you notice and name? This would be a group dynamic that would be very misaligned to most leaders and where they want to take the organization. It creates misaligned mindsets as well. And when we think about how do you change the outcomes, you need to start changing the decisions and the behaviors. To do that, you need to go all the way back to, okay, what are the misaligned mindsets and misaligned group dynamics that are getting in the way? And so this concept of fear very much permeates potentially through the organization. And what we would say is the leaders need to, one, name it. State it for the organization that it exists and that we're going to address it. And then first and foremost, address it at the leadership level. Because I would guess that if there's fear of speaking up within the organization, that's probably modeled at the leadership level. And the peers within the leadership group probably have a little bit of hesitation, if not fear, in speaking up amongst that group. And so how do you address it? Get into a quality conversation around it, notice, name it, and then start talking about what are the opposite of that behavior that we want to model for ourselves and for the broader organization, and give it a name. So it might be some easy version of we need to create the space for quality conversations, or we're going to remove fear, or progress over perfection, whatever that behavior would look like, and then talk to the organization about that. This is a behavioral commitment that we're making for ourselves. We want you to hold us accountable as we work together. We want you to hold us accountable as we work within the rest of the organization. And it's amazing how viral that will come.
Interesting. Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Speaking of alignment and building on the alignment concept here, this is from Alcinda on LinkedIn. Alcinda says, does embedding reward systems improve alignment? People tend to buy into initiatives if it impacts their pockets positively or negatively, loosely speaking. So how do reward systems fit into all this that we're talking about?
Yeah, so reward systems and other things that we would call organizational factors absolutely fit into how do you change behaviors, how do you change decisions, and how do you create alignment? Reward systems and organizational factors are one element of it. And they definitely help to reinforce the alignment that you want to create. What we do know is that through just a lot of research around social science and behavioral science is most likely that's not going to create sustainable alignment. And unless you get to the individual mindsets that are misaligned and the individual group dynamics that are misaligned, if you only rely on the organizational factors, those external things to humans, the things like systems, processes, structures, reward systems, the change in the alignment to that change is not going to be sustainable.
Right. Yeah. Super interesting. Now, a lot of what we've been talking about has been focused on what executives should do and sort of, painting that picture of what good executive leadership and buy-in looks like. What about those of us that are not executives? So in other words, we might be on a project team where we're we're struggling to see this sort of behavior from your executive team. In other words, they're not supporting a lot of, or they're not demonstrating a lot of the behavior and characteristics that you're describing. What are some good ways or tips to manage up the organization if we're on a project team, project leader, wherever we are in the organization, but we're not executives, we're not the people that can influence change in the same way you've been describing? How can we manage up? Can we manage up? I guess would be the first question.
Absolutely. And I would say alignment's not precious to the leadership team. It's not a privilege of a leadership team. Individuals throughout the organization can create alignment. And really just going back to what we talked about before, Eric, the 4 C's. At a program level, at a team level, at an individual level, you can start practicing the skills and capabilities of alignment with your team members. How do you create clarity just within this team? How do you create commitment, connection, and show courage to deliver on this? Quite honestly, when we talked about some of the inadequacies of command and control, as opposed to leading through influence, what I would say is those individuals, if they lead through influence, they'll get noticed. It'll help them rise through the ranks of the organization if that's what they want to do, or just get more responsibility or have more influence. These skills of alignment should be utilized by everyone in the organization.
Yeah. So in other words, we don't need to sit back and wait for the executives to do what we're talking about here. We can be part of that alignment.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And I would say it's a misaligned mindset. It's a mindset that I'm waiting to be led as opposed to stepping in and leading.
Right. Yeah. Because I know you like to study this topic. I know you study history of this topic, Bruce, like I like to as well. I want to come back to a comment from earlier that gets back to your point about finite versus infinite mindsets. And this is from Sid on LinkedIn. And Sid makes a comment here that infinite versus finite is indeed the case in the auto industry. For example, the Asian versus the US auto companies.
Yes.
It's a super, super interesting comment that I hadn't connected those dots, but I think that's an interesting observation. What are your thoughts there? You look at entire industries that have been disrupted and where you have a new leadership model or a new business model that comes in and disrupts, or in some cases destroys an entire industry or certainly certain competitors. Do you think a lot of that does come back to this mindset that you're talking about, the infinite versus the finite?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the auto industry is a great example where you had a lot of Asian companies who overtook the big 3 or whatever you would categorize in the US. And they did that through quality. And the idea around quality is definitely an infinite game in this. And you're not looking at how do I create the most cars in the cheapest way. Quite honestly, in the end, they were probably able to be much more effective and efficient because they looked at a much longer time horizon. And so I think the auto industry is a great example.
Yeah. Another one that comes to mind that I just read about, it's probably been 2 or 3 years now, is a Wall Street Journal article about Jeff Bezos and his CFO. And it was talking about how as they were growing Amazon, and Amazon had already been pretty well established at this point. I think this was probably, I don't know when this was, 10 or 15 years ago. And Jeff Bezos had this idea for Amazon Prime, which for those of you that aren't Amazon customers, you pay, I think, $10 a month basically to get overnight shipping or 2-day shipping on anything you order anywhere in the US at least. So the idea was you pay $10 a month and then you get, no matter what you order, how often you order, you're going to get expedited shipping. And the CFO was adamantly opposed to it. He said, absolutely not. This is going to bankrupt the company. We're going to lose money on customers. And at this point, this is back when Amazon was still doing sort of the land grab of just trying to dominate market share and all that stuff. So, and Jeff Bezos said, no, I'm playing the long game here. Yeah, we're going to lose money in the short term, but long term, it's going to help us. And it turns out that Jeff was probably right, because it seems to have worked pretty well for Amazon now. But the CFO, in the article, it talked about how the CFO almost quit. Like, he was so adamantly opposed to the idea, he almost quit because Jeff just wasn't listening, or Jeff, went against his wisdom. So it's just interesting to see examples like that you're talking about. I may not have thought of it as finite versus infinite mindsets, but that's sort of what we're seeing here. Japanese auto companies, Amazon and Jeff Bezos. I'm sure there's a million other examples that we could point to.
Yeah, I think Amazon's a great example. And if you fast forward, they continue to add more and more value to that idea of how do you be a prime customer. And I think they also looked at how do they create stickiness or loyalty from a customer perspective. So if the idea is I'm getting free shipping, well, I'm probably going to go to Amazon first to look for a piece of product. And they started adding Prime Video and a lot of other value-added capabilities to that offering.
Yeah. I want to get to one more question from the audience, and then I've got a sort of a closing question for you, Bruce. But this one's from Darian on LinkedIn. Darian says, what happens if the executives don't like the influence you have as someone who's lower? How do you approach that conversation? So let's just say I'm lower in the organization. I'm trying to create that alignment and that just that overall alignment that you were just describing before, sort of bottoms up or from the bottom up the organization. How do you approach that, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the advice I would give is continue to point back to the North Star. And so what's the North Star for the organization and for this executive? And so what is this executive trying to achieve? What is this leader trying to achieve? What's the broader organization trying to achieve? And really getting a very good understanding of what that North Star is. Part of the problem is in many organizations, there's not shared meaning around that North Star. So what I would suggest for that individual is if they're having trouble with a given executive because that executive is not appreciating the influence that they're having, is take a step back. Try to create shared meaning around what is the North Star? What are we trying to achieve collectively? And how do we do this collectively? I think the leader, that leader in the case, may not have a mindset that this individual is coming from positive intent. And so this individual may need to step back a little bit and really demonstrate that they are coming from positive intent.
Yeah, very interesting. Well said. So what, I'm going to ask you a two-part question to sort of tie this all together and to close out the conversation. And I'll ask it from the perspective of if I'm an executive, and then I'll ask it from the perspective of if I'm not an executive, I'm lower in the organization. But what closing advice would you have to help get executives on board and more supportive of change? So all the stuff we're talking about sounds great, but how do we get started? What are some first steps that we could take either as an executive or as a someone lower in the organization?
Yeah, so I would answer that in a couple ways. First, I think we all recognize that business is becoming more digital, whether it's AI, whether it's big enterprise systems, and whether that digital is internally focused or externally focused. Externally focused meaning we're creating more data products and we're looking for more revenue generating products that are in the digital space as opposed to in the hard product space. So business is becoming ever more digital. I think one of the mindset shifts that we would propose to executives to start with is to really understand that leadership is becoming even more human-centric, that this idea of a digital becoming more business, don't get lost and believe that then I can be more aloof. I could be step back, potentially even use AI to help lead my organization. Leadership is becoming much more human-centric. This idea of start weaving in the power of leading through influence, the power of leading through alignment, and start with yourself. That's the advice that I would give executives.
Yeah. And here I was secretly hoping you would say that AI would just solve all this for us, but you're saying that is not true.
It may solve a lot of business implications, but at a leadership level, the human-centric nature of it's not going away. It's only getting more prevalent.
All right.
And I would say it's probably going to be a big differentiator going forward. So how leaders lead might be one of the most important things on how successful organizations are writ large, as well as against their competition.
Yeah, it's a great point, because you cannot chat GPT that, all the stuff you're talking about here. You can't just automate it or use technology to somehow help you figure it out. It is, you're right. It's something that I don't think will ever be automated or made any easier. So the ones that can do it well are going to have a distinct advantage. I know when your colleague Julie was on here, she was very forthcoming and transparent about resources you guys have available. And if I want to learn more about Karrikins and or executive alignment, what are some best ways for us to do that?
Yeah, we've got a rich set of content on karrikinsgroup.com. So feel free to go out there. There's a spot on the website called Coffee Break Corner, which has all of the recordings that we've made with various webinars. We expose a lot of our research, our methodologies, our approaches. So go out there, we look at how we approach our work. We have our behavior change model out there. We have our what we call our diamond triangle model, which is more of a meta model that a lot of our work fits within. So our website's a great place to start. Feel free to reach out to me. We'll post my email address, and happy to have a chat.
All right, that was great stuff. Thanks for being here today, Bruce. Really appreciate having you on the show, and thank you to the audience for the great questions. We've got a lot more to cover here in episode 163 of Transformation Ground Control. We're going to get into AI and AI's role in digital transformation. We're going to do a total 180 from what we just talked about with Bruce, talking about the human side of transformation. Now we're going to do a 180 and talk about AI and how that's affecting digital transformations and ERP initiatives throughout the world. So stick around. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control. People oftentimes ask me how I built such a strong social media following on YouTube and LinkedIn and Facebook and other outlets. And the fact of the matter is it took me a long time to build a following through a lot of trial and error, making a lot of mistakes. Had I known that there were companies out there that could help me build my brand, I would have done that a long time ago. I didn't know that, but the good news is that there is today a consulting firm that will help you through building your own personal brand through some of their training programs. The company is called Roloff Consulting, and if you're familiar with Emma Roloff, she's someone that I've had on this podcast before, and she's well known in the digital transformation space as well as the sales space, and she's big on TikTok, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And she and her husband have started a training course and a training company that focuses on helping people build their personal brands and helping them to sell themselves digitally. So whether you're a salesperson that's trying to reach more customers or you're an individual that's just trying to build your personal brand, that's something that they help with through their training programs. And they've offered listeners of this podcast a free 5-day LinkedIn challenge. And I encourage you to check it out. I've included a link below for this podcast. If you go to the podcast notes, you'll find a link that gets you free access to this 5-day challenge where you'll get step-by-step guidance. You'll get real results. So you'll get some tangible results from the program. And you also get a special offer at the end of it. So it's exclusive to listeners of this podcast. Be sure to check out the link below if you want to work on building your personal brand, or if you're in sales and you're trying to reach more people. Whatever the case may be, check it out. It's free to listeners of this podcast. You can check it out via the link below.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Tom Productions and sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent consulting firm that I work for that helps clients with digital strategy, software selection, implementation planning, and implementations as well. So you can learn more about us at thirdstage-consulting.com. And there's also a bunch of resources that you can find from us that you can access for free. Just go to the links in the description field below. So, Darian, we just had this conversation with Bruce talking about the important topic of executive alignment and leadership in digital transformations. What did you think of the conversation? I know we've never had him on the show. I learned a lot, but what were your thoughts and takeaways from that?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot as well. I think it's a really good insight to look at not only what executives need to think about when going into digital transformation, but also I know we touched on what if you're not an executive and what does that look like as well. So I thought that part of the conversation was really interesting for myself. But overall, what a great conversation. And
yeah, because I think a lot of times, we work with clients where the executives are on board when we start off a project, but then you get through the project and executives sort of fade into the distance or fade into the background because they're just, they're going back to their real jobs day to day. And I know Bruce talked about how, transformations can't be a side hustle. he used the word side hustle, and that's a great point. And it's true for executives too, even though executives have a lot of responsibility other than a transformation, other than leading a transformation. It's arguably the most important thing that they're responsible for in a organization. So I think that was really interesting as well, to sort of get that perspective too, in terms of how you can garner support from executives when you're not an executive yourself. And it was refreshing to hear him say that there are things you can do as a lower level person. There are things you can do to influence and to affect alignment and executive involvement and leadership and all that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Lots of good learning points in that conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And if you haven't heard the episode with Julie Williamson, she was on probably 3 or 4 months ago. I believe we had her on. I want to say it was in somewhere around the fall, in the fall in the Western Hemisphere, or the Northern Hemisphere, I should say. The fall time frame, somewhere in September, October, somewhere in there, I think we had her on. So if you go back through our past episodes, you'll see one with Julie Williamson, and she talks about executive alignment in particular. That's what we focus on there. So that's another complementary or a supplementary interview that you might check out if you like that conversation with Bruce. So we're going to totally shift gears and move away from the human side of change a bit and get into AI again. We're going to talk about how it is that AI affects digital transformations and ERP implementations. And for this segment, we're going to play you a video from my YouTube channel where I dive into this topic in a bit more detail. So let's roll this clip of the role of AI in digital transformation, and we'll come back after that. So let's roll the clip.
Now, the first way that AI is changing and improving ERP software as we know it is that it's allowing organizations to finally take advantage of all this data they've been accumulating for years, and decades in many cases. If you think about organizations going back to the 60s, we're starting to automate their business processes, starting to automate their data capture, and certainly that trend accelerated in the 70s and 80s into the 90s. And I'd say starting since the 90s, most organizations were on some sort of electronic computer system starting to collect data. So you've got at least 30 to 40 years plus of organizational history that a lot of organizations have that have been around for a long time, but they haven't known what to do with this data. They've had dirty data, they've had trouble mapping it, migrating it to new systems as they've done upgrades. So that's been a problem in the past, but now with AI, if we can get our data right, it gives us a way to actually make use of that data. So instead of just having reams and reams of transactional data going back 30 years, now we can use AI to make more sense and more meaning of it. We can also use predictive analytics and machine learning and other aspects and subcomponents of AI to help us predict the future and understand what might happen based on some of our historic data. And it's not just our internal data that AI within ERP software is allowing us to take advantage of, it's also third-party sources of data. So if we can look at external macroeconomic indicators or weather patterns or other things that might affect our business, we can take those data sets and integrate it with our core internal data and then use AI models to help predict the future. So as more ERP software vendors continue to build up their AI capabilities, more of them are going to find ways to improve the way organizations are getting value from AI. I'd say the lowest hanging fruit for AI within ERP software systems and the deployments that go along with them, as we know it today, is going to be generative and conversational AI. And if you don't know what that is, it's essentially the component of AI that allows you to talk to the system or type a question within a system and have a conversation rather than having to go into a system, go to a specific report, or go to a specific set of transactions to find the data you're looking for. If any of you have tried or used ChatGPT, for example, that's an example of conversational AI. You can type within ChatGPT a question or ask it to analyze something and it's going to come back with a response. You don't have to go Google a bunch of results. You don't have to go into your ERP system to pull a bunch of data. And this is where a lot of ERP software vendors are starting. They're starting with these conversational AI models that sit on top of their ERP platform and the ERP database to allow you to interact with the system in a different way. So you don't have to memorize where you need to go, what screen you need to go to, what field you need to fill out. You can type in a set of questions or a description of what you're looking for, and that conversational AI interface will allow you to receive that information accordingly. So as we look to where we are right now in the maturity curve of AI within ERP software, conversational and generative AI is probably the furthest along, and that's where a lot of software vendors are providing some capabilities there. So look for this as a way to really automate and streamline and change the way employees use and interact with your systems in your data going forward. Now, in addition to generative and conversational AI, there's other creative uses of AI that are being used by ERP software vendors and some of the more innovative companies that are deploying ERP systems. One example is just being able to analyze data in unique ways. So if we've always had a report that was run a certain way or showed a certain set of data, not only can we now just conversationally ask the AI interface for that same information without having to go create a report manually, now we could ask it to go a step further and create a graph that compares different subsets of data, or create a visual representation in a way that we haven't done before. So it really allows us and allows employees within our organizations to think outside the box of how we could be using these ERP systems and the data within them to capture information and analyze information and create outputs in different ways than we ever have. And this is where it becomes really important to not just deploy AI and assume that people are going to figure out how to do that. This is where, when we define our future state, we need to be creative about figuring out how are we going to use the AI capabilities either within our ERP system or a third-party AI solution that allows us to provide that information and those capabilities to our employees. So in other words, we can't assume that our employees are just going to figure out and come to the right answer by accident. We have to paint a vision for them of how they might use AI to get to information faster and to be more creative in how they deploy and use AI within their ERP systems.
We're here playing a clip of the role of artificial intelligence in digital transformations and ERP implementations. We've got a lot more to cover on this topic, so stick around and we'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, a ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 163. My name is Eric Kimberling here at Darian, Chwialkowski, and we're here in the midst of a conversation or a video we're rolling for you that talks about artificial intelligence and its role in ERP implementations and digital transformations and how it's affecting enterprise technology. So let's jump back into the conversation.
Now, it's important to recognize that as we're talking about ERP software and AI, it's not just the AI capabilities that are being built within the ERP systems themselves that you have as an option. You also have the option of a standalone AI solution. And there's a lot of AI vendors out there, a lot of upstarts and startups that are creating AI solutions that can be bolted onto or worked within a certain technical landscape. For example, you have AI solutions that are allowing you to access data from multiple systems, and it's allowing you to analyze that data, create outputs, and create some of the analyses and predictive analytics and some of the forecasting that AI affords, but it's not necessarily something you have to rely on the ERP software vendor to provide. You can also go find third-party AI providers that can provide some of those capabilities, especially if you're working with a software vendor that's still building those capabilities. It doesn't quite have the AI maturity as a standalone AI solution. So when you're evaluating ERP systems, it may be worth not only looking at the AI capabilities of whatever system you're looking at, but also look at the third-party AI solutions that might work with that ERP system, as well as other legacy systems that you are going to retain for a short period or perhaps even permanently on top of any new ERP system you might deploy. So be sure to consider your full options when you're deploying ERP software in terms of how you might use AI. Now, what's really interesting about AI and ERP software is that it sort of triangulates itself or comes together with another trend in the market, which is the movement to the cloud. ERP software vendors are, for the most part, en masse moving to the cloud. They've transitioned their on-premise legacy systems or are in the process of transitioning those systems to cloud solutions that are largely rewrites of that legacy software. And the beauty here, in addition to other benefits of deploying cloud technology, is it really enables AI in a way that we haven't seen before. So if you think about your old legacy systems and some of the security issues you might have had and some of the silos of data, the lack of interconnectivity that you might have had, the dirty data, it didn't really lend itself well to really capitalize on AI in the way we can today. Fast forward to cloud solutions now, you've got a standard data model, standard business processes, less likelihood of corrupting the data because now you have standard processes to manage that data, and you've got all your data now presumably in one place in the cloud. And that's where AI really shines, because now AI can be used and rely upon more reliable data to help fuel the models and help provide information and help provide value that AI can afford. The other component that's really interesting is as we look to third-party data sources, especially as we look at things like Internet of Things and wearables and other devices that are capturing data outside of our four walls of our organization, now with cloud computing, we can capture that data and integrate that data with our internal data to further enable those AI models. So there's a lot happening in the cloud space that is really accelerating the trend towards AI, and it's really a sort of a perfect storm or a perfect backdrop for AI to really take off and to continue to gain adoption and mainstream use within the ERP software space, which is largely why the ERP software vendors are investing so heavily in AI right now. So I hope this has provided you some understanding of how AI is affecting and improving ERP systems. More importantly, I hope it's helped provide some context of how you might use AI within your ERP software deployment to be more effective and get more business value. If you'd like to learn more about trends that are happening in the marketplace and things to be aware of and things to understand as you go through your ERP implementation, I encourage you to read our annual digital transformation report. It's a report we publish each year that covers a number of tips and lessons from ERP implementations, as well as trends in the marketplace, as well as independent reviews and rankings of different enterprise technology and ERP solutions. So you can read that report by scanning the QR code in front of you, and you can read that for free off our website using the QR code in front of you. So I hope you found this information useful and hope you have a great day.
All right, so that's a video from my YouTube channel where I talk about how AI is affecting ERP software and the implementations of ERP software and digital transformations in general. What were some of your thoughts and questions from that video, Darian?
Yeah, so one question I have for you as somebody who comes or owns an independent consulting firm, how do you evaluate the impact of AI on ERP selection and implementation processes? I know you touched on it in that video, or basically talked about it. That was what the video was about. But if you could just give a little bit more of insight on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, well, I think for the time being, AI might be a good tool to help point you in a right direction of potential solutions to consider, but I still wouldn't rely on AI to tell you what system is best or what system is best for your organization, only because you're going to have so many different unique factors that you've got to consider, and you're not going to have that. Presumably, you're not going to have that answer, available in an AI model. The other thing too is, we talked about this earlier in this episode, is biases in data. So anytime you've got biases in data, which the enterprise technology space is fraught with bias and biased data out there, marketing and sales messaging and things like that, that's the same data. That biased data is the same data that AI is going to be using to give you an answer. So you have to be careful with AI to make the software selection decision. But having said that, there's things you can do during implementation, as I talk about in the video. There's things you can do during implementation to speed things up and to be more effective in how you implement the technology.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of challenges, what are some other potential challenges that people could face if they are using AI to pick their ERP system, and why would you not recommend that they do that besides just the bias that AI has?
Yeah, I mean, bias is the big one, but then there's also the incomplete information. If you've got certain things that are unique to you as an organization and you're relying on AI to give you an answer, chances are the AI is not going to have the right answer, because if it's something unique to you, it's not going to have that data presumably in their data set to create an answer for you. And the other thing too you have to be aware of is if you do have some super sensitive or super confidential types of information that you want to use to get to the bottom of what systems are the best for you, you enter that into an open AI model, you enter that information, that becomes part of the AI model. The AI model now has access to your data that you've given it. So you have to be careful that you're not feeding it confidential information that is now part of this open AI model. And there's still a lot of regulatory or legal system type stuff that's being worked out in terms of intellectual property and confidentiality. For me, I don't even want to mess with that until it's clarified, which is not clarified in courts or anything like that. We did have an attorney on here not too long ago. His name's Marcus Harris. He's been on the show several times, and he was on recently talking about AI and some of the regulatory and legal considerations for AI. And that was one of the big things he talked about, is just the fact that anything you enter into AI, like if I were to take your personal information, Darian, your social security number, your driver's license number, your birthday, your mother's maiden name, I enter that into AI for some reason. I don't know why I would do it, but let's just say I did. I had some brilliant reason to enter all your personal information to AI to ask it something. Now the AI model and the data set, your sensitive information is in the data set that AI is using. So you just have to be aware that you sort of lose that data at that point, and who knows what happens to it. You might assume that it's going to be locked down, or it's okay because it's, no one else can directly access it, but you never can be too sure. So there's a lot of unknowns there. I'll be curious to see how the courts and the legal system works through all that stuff in the coming years and maybe even decades it takes to work all this stuff out.
Yeah, that's some great points. Stuff that maybe everybody wouldn't think about when using AI to maybe help them in any sort of way. So that's a really interesting point, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. So good stuff. We'll see how it unfolds and how it affects digital transformations in coming years. I'd be curious to hear from the audience how you're seeing AI affect your digital transformations, either in terms of how you execute a transformation and or how you're using AI as part of your transformation, is how you're using AI to improve your business and leverage some of the software tools that you have. So be curious to hear from the audience. How are you using AI and how are you seeing it affect the world of digital transformation? I'd love to hear your comments in the chat here. So all that being said, a great episode, Darian. Thank you for being here today, and thank you to the audience for the great questions. Thank you to Bruce Siegel for being here and being a guest on the show. I appreciate having him on the show here for the first time. And again, you can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. If you'd like to learn more about Third Stage Consulting, you can reach out to us. I've included contact information below. You can also go to thirdstage-consulting.com, and you can also follow me or connect with me on social media. I've included all my accounts and ways to contact and get in touch with me in the description below, so be sure to check that out. So thank you again for being here today, everyone. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next week on Transformation Ground Control.